at what point do I tell the neighbors? Like, what if they give me like their garage door code and they ask me to feed their cat when they're out of town? Should I tell them now? Like, hi, I'm Dana. And my husband said, I don't think that you should walk up to the neighbors and introduce yourself with your criminal history. Makes me think about the bubble that we do have. For me, that started with just talking to some of my neighbors about being in recovery. In that stigma reduction piece, when we know I don't need to dump my life story and prison stories on people that I just met, but at the same time, like sometimes just talking about something as simple as being in recovery opens doors for them to share their family's journey, and maybe they haven't shared that before.
Stories are powerful.
Welcome to the Rise, Recover, Live podcast, brought to you by The Phoenix. This is a space where people impacted by substance use can come to share their story of strength and resilience, get open and honest, and inspire hope and build community through shared experience.
We'll be talking to people in our community on their own recovery journey and shine a light on the topic of recovery in all its forms. Maybe you'll hear some of your story in theirs.
Let's show the world that together we rise, recover, and live.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Rise, Recover, Live, the podcast. We are your hosts, Bryce III.
I'm Liz McKean. And we're so excited to be here today, and we're still figuring out our intro.
And we continue to keep the suggestions coming for the intros. I think we will probably not even land on one. We'll just continue to do different things every episode to keep things fresh, to keep you guessing and on your toes.
Speaking of that, Bryce, how's your energy today?
My energy is pretty good. I'm going on like 30 hours of not eating food. I had a little bit of weird stomach things going on yesterday. So I got a very restful sleep last night, and I think I'm going to break fast today after this call with maybe some soup or something like that. But it's one of those renewing energies where it's like, yo, I've been doing things a certain way for so long, and my body is just shouting at me like, yo, you need to chill out and give it some blank space and like reset. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. How about you, Liz? Ooh. How's your energy?
My energy is just a little concerned about your poor hungry tummy. So, but otherwise good. Really excited to have this conversation, and always excited to be in a room with you.
Me too. Who do we have on the call today, Liz?
Oh my gosh. We have Dana Smith, who is part of the Phoenix family, like so many folks who we talk to. Been with the Phoenix, I think, for about 6 years. And I think we're going to take this conversation in a few new directions today. I'm excited to hear about her story a little bit and really where she is today in regards to the Phoenix journey that we've all been on together. So welcome, Dana. Thanks so much for being here. How are you?
Dana.
Thanks for having me. I am
How are you?
Great. I am grateful. I know you didn't ask, but that's where the energy is at today. Just grateful. It
was coming.
Yeah. I knew it was coming because I listened to your podcast. Just grateful. I think, you didn't even ask me a question and I immediately jump into stories, but that's just how I am. So bear with me here. I remember leaving prison, I don't know what it was, maybe 9 years ago. And I didn't have a driver's license at the time. And so I rode my bike to work, and I was in Chicago on Lake Michigan in freezing cold temperatures in the winter. And I remember just thinking, it is freezing. I am on a bicycle. And I am so grateful to feel this cold wind on my face. And that's something that in that moment, I just vowed to not forget and to not let go of. And so here I am. I try to just maintain, not to say I feel that way every day, but most days I try to maintain that same sense of gratitude.
That's so important. Gratitude is such an important tool to be able to use to be able to show up for life on life's terms. I think there's two different experiences that can be had riding a bike off of Lake Michigan. Having just gotten back from Chicago over this past weekend, it can be cold and frigid, and especially if you didn't have a choice but to ride a bike, it could be like, oh man, life sucks. I'm in a circumstance where I have no other choice but to ride this bike. It's cold. I don't have enough clothes on. I'm riding a bike. Or, the way that you chose to look at it. And I think that reframing of life allows for us to really curate our experience. So that's huge.
Makes me think of that comic that I see for a million different reasons on social media, where there's a guy on a train, or there's two guys on a train. There's one facing one direction and it's just mountain. It's just like rock that you can see. And he's just looking all miserable and sad. And then there's another guy just directly across the aisle looking the other direction. And it's just this like beautiful, nature and everything. And it's just, perspective. And he's got a big smile on his face. So.
And then when you talk about like perspective, so I do quite a bit of teaching, and one of the things that I'm clinging on to this season is storytelling is important. I mean, when you listen to this show, the first thing that you hear is stories are powerful. And I really believe so. And I think one of the most important stories, if not the most important story that we'll ever tell, is the story that we tell ourselves. And Dana, I've come to know you as a great storyteller in quite a few different aspects. But even starting this episode out with you kind of, leading with like, okay, this is the story that I learned to tell myself when my life made a change. Have you always inherently been a storyteller like that? Or like, was that something that was cultivated because of necessity? What is your experience with telling stories? Because you're a great story. You've helped me be able to tell stories with a heart, head, core, and like having some templates to be able to approach that. So give us a little bit of background of like how you began to tell stories and why you think that's important in recovery, but just in life.
I've always enjoyed writing, and I remember some years ago when I was in a pretty difficult spot. I was living on the street, and I used to do these writing exercises, and I would be riding on the subway in Chicago, and I would look at people's shoes, and I would write a story about their life based on the shoes that they were wearing. Not a judgment sort of story, but just creative writing. And so I think I always enjoyed that creative outlet that I found through writing. And in my journey in sobriety and working with Phoenix, I've found that that's an outlet that I've been able to tap into. We have these phenomenal stories of people who are changing their lives, and how do we share that with people, and how do we help cultivate that within people to share their own stories. I'm curious, Bryson, hearing you say that, the power of sharing our own stories. What's the story that you tell yourself?
I think it's ever changing. I think the foundation underlying everything is that there is compassionate unfolding. Like, be gentle with yourself. Like, everything is absolutely necessary. Wherever you are is where you're supposed to be, and everything serves the purpose of preparing you for life on life's terms. So like when it gets too tough, when it gets crazy, I just try to bring myself back to that space and remind myself like, yeah, this is important. This is important. And this is allowing you to cultivate wisdom. And you're going to need this wisdom for whatever comes next. But also, like, don't be such in a rush to get to what's next, because right now is exactly where you're supposed to be. So I think, like, to sum that up, I always go to, the phrase, you can't open a rose with a sledgehammer. And I think that's been the story of my recovery and intentional living. Is just like, yo, you're blossoming. And once that rose opens, there will be another context of which a rose opens. And so just to allow for the flower to unfold as it's supposed to.
Can't open a rose with a sledgehammer. I've certainly tried a lot of times.
I will pick up the hammer plenty of times within the next week, I promise you. But there's that thing that goes off that's like, okay, put the hammer down, man. It's not going to work like that.
Yeah. How about you, Liz?
Amazing.
What's the story you're telling yourself?
Man, I even had a heads up because Bryce had to go first. So I think, Bryce and I had this really, Bryce and I always have great conversations, but we had one earlier about how so often the things that we tell other people, or even like the way we tell other people's stories, is what we need to hear, and so Bryce is someone who's really taught me a lot about compassion, but there's times that I find myself telling Bryce, like just reminding him, like, you're so hard on yourself, like, be a little more compassionate to, your precious heart. And I think it's the same thing, like I tend to hear all the stories that we talk about on this podcast, and just anybody that I'm so fortunate to meet out in the world, and hold every single part of their experience with so much just reverence. And then sometimes I'll look at my story and feel differently, and be like, man, I should have this figured out by now. I should be better at this by now. Or, why am I still, overscheduling myself, or, man, I didn't go to bed early enough last night, and things like that. So I think the story I tell myself, I try to remind myself is a story, and what I want to continue to bring in is just that, like, compassion, and just that I'm doing the best that I can. And the more I learn and the more people I get to know, the more, like Bryce was saying, wisdom that I have to make that best even better, and just allowing the bumps in the road to come as they will, and be unbelievably grateful every single day I get to wake up in the morning and still and try again and take another breath, because Lord knows that, there were plenty of times I didn't think that was going to happen. So there was plenty of times I didn't want that to happen. So to be able to just be here and have any story at all is pretty amazing. And then to be on this platform and with the two of you, and be able to hear your stories and thoughts and things coming from your heart is just like the greatest honor I could ever imagine. So thanks for asking, Dana. Man, I love it when someone comes on our podcast and interviews us.
Well, I think it just
makes our job easier.
I think this podcast is an evolution of what my Phoenix journey has been like. On my first day at Phoenix, I remember walking in the doors, and the person who greeted me just asked how I was doing. It's like a harmless question. And within minutes, I was like sobbing, and I'm telling the guy my life story. And I realized, like, no one had ever asked in that way. And what I know now, looking back in hindsight, is that he had created a safe and supportive space for me to break down. I didn't know that I needed that, but I came from an environment, I had been in prison for a while. I came from an environment where you don't do that. You don't answer that question openly and honestly, and you certainly don't break down crying. But he created the space for me to do that. And then he ended up being my supervisor when I started working at Phoenix. And I remember going into his office one day, and we were supposed to be reviewing a bill that was going to be presented at the state legislature. And we're supposed to be reviewing this bill, and we have a stack of papers on the desk. And I was going through a tough time and in my personal life. And again, he asked me how I was doing. Simple question. And when I told him, he put his feet up on the desk. He pushed the bill to the side of his desk, and we didn't read the bill that day. We just talked. And so, in my life, I always go back to that, the example that set for me. And there's days where, yes, I work for Phoenix today. I get absorbed in the spreadsheets, and I do the strategies, and I do the things. But at the end of the day, the most important thing to me is when the three of us can connect, and I can hear the story that you're telling yourself today. That's what inspires me to change the story that I'm telling myself. That's what inspires us in our lives, and keeps us moving forward in a way that we can bring others on this journey with us.
Yeah, and such is the notion of community. I mean, you were sharing a little bit before we press record, and if you want to go back there while we're live, you're more than welcome to. But just having that community of people to prop you up, support you, and be there when you're going through it. And yeah, I relate to being on staff like with the Phoenix, and there's been more than a couple of times where it's like, yeah, things are rolling, but then there's just this stop where it's like, okay, but how is everybody? Like how is your energy? Like, do you need anything? And the conversation might turn to therapy or best holistic practices to show up for yourself. And I feel like that's something that I've kind of inherently been within my recovery journey, but I've also been in environments that aren't necessarily supportive of that. So I had to okay, this is separate. When I go home, I'm gonna have this conversation, with myself or, with my 12-step community or wherever it is that I can find that support. But it's super cool to have a community where kind of all things are there, where it's like, okay, yeah, we do cool stuff. Like something, it was a phrase that came across my line maybe earlier this year, like doing hard things with easy people, and that's been an absolute blessing. Like, I can't think of any other word for it. Where it's like I've been in spaces where I'm working to get something done, but the people around you aren't necessarily caring about you. Neither are they caring about themselves, and so it's just cool to have that support.
Yeah, it sure is. And Dana, I feel like I think this when I thought about going into this conversation with you. I know that I've only heard little snippets of your story here and there, and like you mentioned earlier, there was like incarceration as part of your story. Certainly, substance use is part of your story, like it is most of our stories. And the fact that like we not only can but need to talk about that in a professional environment, and that we have these folks who we know like on the professional level, but then there is just like this inherent personal side of what we do, and we're better at it because of that. Like the things that we held with the most shame, for myself anyways, like these are the things that I was just so ashamed of for years and years that now are at the top of my resume. And the reason that my work is as good as it is and I can support people the way that I can feels like, how could this possibly be real life? I was excited to hear your story because I know that you, I think, have to share stories similar to Bryce and I, even more so like in your professional world because of the kind of work that you do. And I think both of us always hope that when we bring someone onto this show who shares their story a lot, maybe we can dive into areas that they haven't done 1,000 times, so because it can be, you can start to get, you have it memorized in the way that you're telling it, but there's so many little like corners that are, I think, cathartic personally to dive into, and also, really always help the person listening. So love to hear whatever part of your story you want to start with that maybe is an area that you don't always get to talk about.
Yeah, I think Bryce mentioned like the we do cool stuff, and that's what drew me to Phoenix. Phoenix was an organization where people were doing cool stuff and they were sober, and that was all that I knew about it. I wanted to do cool stuff with sober people. And for me at the time, that was the physical fitness sort of activities. It was boxing. I tried rock climbing. I was just really drawn to that. I was in a point in my life where I wanted to be active and I wanted to be surrounded by a group of sober people who were doing the same. So that's what drew me to Phoenix. And like I said, I didn't know that there was more to it than that. I didn't know anything about the safe and supportive space. I didn't really understand the community. I thought the community was just people to do cool stuff with. I didn't know that it extended beyond that. And so what that has looked like for me and how it's extended beyond that over the past 6 or so years is that today I have an incredibly supportive family who I'm very close to. But in addition to that, I have a Phoenix family. And it extends so far beyond, boxing or kayaking or meditation or the various activities that we do. It is every day. It is when I have a tough day, the person that I text or call is someone that I met at Phoenix. And, sometimes it's the little stuff and it's sometimes really big and heavy stuff. When I started my recovery journey, things went so well. So well. I know in 12-step communities, they sometimes talk about the pink cloud. I was on the pink cloud for like 13 years. Nothing went wrong. It was things just kept getting better and better. Sure, there were some minor setbacks, but things just kept getting better and better. And this past summer was the first time for me when I was really hit with something that I never thought that I would experience in life, but also I needed a community behind me. So this past summer, I moved from Colorado back to where I'm from outside of Chicago. And I attended the 4th of July parade in Highland Park, Illinois, with my husband, my 5-year-old daughter, and my 67-year-old parents. And, it was a day that it's hard for me to even think about now, despite all the therapy and it being several months behind me. It was just devastating. It was devastating to see a mass shooting like that happen at a parade where, it was older people and children. It was horrific. And on that day, we were spectators at the parade. We ran, and this woman sheltered us in her house for 4 hours. And she's a woman that we didn't know. We never met her. And she just said, get in my house. And 27 of us hid in her house for 4 hours. And during that 4 hours, this woman that I didn't know, she turned to me and she said, I've been sober for a year and I don't know if I'm going to make it. This woman didn't know me. She didn't know that I was in recovery. I have no idea why she chose me to say this to. But of course, I did the things where I got her phone number. I talked to her all that week to support her. But when she said that to me, when she said, I don't know if I'm going to make it, it dawned on me that never for a second did I doubt my recovery in that moment. Because what happened for me after that shooting is I was swarmed by the Phoenix family. I'm talking text messages, phone calls, people, sending me random things and gifts, and I'm thinking of you. And Phoenix members, volunteers, staff, probation and parole officers that I've met over the years in my work at Phoenix. It was this incredible outpouring of support. And I realized that is something that I've built because of this community. That is something that not everyone has. And my ultimate goal in working at Phoenix, it's not to do the spreadsheets and the strategies. I want people to be in a position that if anyone in the world experiences some kind of anything, whether it's a big trauma, a little trauma, whatever it is, we should have a family around them that scoops them up the way that the Phoenix family did for me last summer.
I think that's part of how we are changing the world. I mean, in addition to just within the Phoenix, having that family and having that just embrace around you at all times, no matter what big thing happens, the hard and the really beautiful. I feel like that just is one more example of how, we call the Phoenix a movement. But I also have heard it said, and I have said that we're actually part of a movement. There's a much bigger movement that we're just helping to fuel in whatever way, be part of in whatever way we can. Because even if that woman doesn't remember that Phoenix was part of the conversation that you had with her or anybody else who witnessed that, the fact that that conversation was had and it was so loving, and that repeats itself, in other areas. So maybe that person comes to be part of the Phoenix family, which is incredible. And I hope so but maybe that person just reaches out a hand that they might have been afraid to somebody else, and just changes the way we interact as a community, as humans. How beautiful would that be if it could just be that way, that we were just took care of each other?
Yeah, I think too, like there's a balance, or a balancing act. I don't think I've ever been balanced in life. Like I'm 100% this or I'm 100% that, but it's like a balancing act. And I think, because I'm sure there's people that are listening to this episode that are like, I don't have a community. Like that sounds great, but I don't have that support system. And sometimes, like, I've learned, at least in my own personal experience, like I've had to be that. I've had to be that person, and being that person 9 times out of 10 leads me to those people. But like to find community, like I had to get outside of my comfort zone and go where I believed that the people who were in alignment with the ways that I desired my life to look like were. Or flip side, like Dana, in that circumstance that you were in, that woman who opened her house, she could have very well not have opened her house. So being that person that's like, yo, come in, get in, that is what attracts us and keeps us around the people that will help for us to be propped up, as well as give us an opportunity to prop others up. Because like Liz was saying, like beyond the Phoenix, I feel like I always want to be in addition to the conversation where it's like some people don't know what the Phoenix is still. Like some people haven't been in any Phoenix programming, and some people are just listening for, like, how do I get support in my life right now? Like, so even beyond the Phoenix, just in living a life that creates community around us, it's important for us to show up and do the things that we expect to be done, create the life that we expect to see, and take that one step. And, yes, in the context of the Phoenix, where maybe that one step is downloading the Phoenix app or, and attending your first program, and whether it be virtual or in person. But maybe it's like, I want to live in a happier world. I want to live in a world where people support each other. And today I decide to open a door for somebody and give a random smile to somebody, because that's what I need, and then our lives begin to blossom because that's what we've given. Like that's what we start to be receptive to. So we start to see more of it. And it's an interesting process. In a process that is an absolute privilege to be a part of now. That's for sure.
When Bryce mentioned the app, I was thinking about that experience for me moving from Colorado, where I had this deeply embedded Phoenix community for so many years. I moved back to the Chicago area, and through the app, people started messaging me. And, I had on my profile on the app that I live in this suburb, and I started getting messages from people where we don't yet have Phoenix programs. Hey, I'm so-and-so, and I live here, and this is, and so I think, Bryce, what you're saying about stepping out of your comfort zone and reaching out to those people who are going to be that for you, I have been so amazed and impressed to see that happening. And sometimes I'm the person instigating it, and sometimes I'm not. It's getting these messages from people that I don't know that, hey, I'm a Phoenix member here and you don't know me, but, and then I start a conversation with that person.
Yeah. And it takes courage because sometimes, most times, all the time, it can be uncomfortable to reach out to somebody I don't know, or to say hello to somebody when I'm walking down the street, or, to ask for help, or to ask if someone needs support. Like that, there's an uncomfortability that comes with that. But, and so even like in the context of Phoenix programming, where it's like all of our programming is free, to anybody with just 48 hours of sobriety. And it's like, even the 48 hours of sobriety is a huge cost. Like that's not negating, like 48 hours of sobriety is a huge token, so that's cost enough. So I wouldn't say it's free, but even beyond that, there's still the cost of getting outside your comfort zone, saying hello to somebody you don't know, going above and beyond to register or log into the virtual app, or maybe this is your third program and you decide, okay, this time I'm gonna cut my camera on. Just those little itty bitty steps that allow for us to be transparent, be open, be vulnerable. Like that vulnerability piece is huge, and it sometimes sucks, like the way that it feels, but like the payback is tenfold. Every time I've decided to go the vulnerable route versus the shutting down route, like every time I've done that, there has been a reveal that it's like, oh, like life is so much bigger, or oh, there's so much more support, or oh, I'm not alone. Where I thought that I didn't have that that community, there actually is a community. I just need to open up, and that was the token to open the door.
We've spoken to a lot of people on this platform, and I don't know if we've spoken to somebody who has a lot of who has been in recovery for a lot of years. So I think a really cool perspective that you have, Dana, in addition to just because you're someone who has a beautiful perspective, is that you've been on this path, or possibly more than one path, for a long time. So is there any really marked changes that you've seen when it comes to the way people are able to reach out a hand, or your ability to reach out a hand and be comfortable doing that? I know there's just more conversation now than there was even a few years ago. So I'm wondering how that was for you in the very beginning.
I think about what Bryce just said about smiling at somebody on the street. And I think the conversation is probably bigger than just for those of us who are in recovery. I think I've learned that it's not a matter of just picking up the phone and calling somebody who I met in a 12-step meeting. 12-step was a big part of my early sobriety journey for the first 7 years or so, but is not today. And in my early years, it was like, oh, pick up the phone and call somebody from a 12-step meeting who I don't know. That was a really tough thing to do. But now I think about it as being so much bigger than that. It's smiling at that person on the street, and how do we evolve in our communities, and not just our recovery communities, where can I go shovel my neighbor's driveway and start a conversation with my neighbor? I don't know whether they're in recovery or not, but that's probably something I should do if I notice that their driveway isn't shoveled in the middle of a snowstorm. Maybe they need that, and then it opens the door for those conversations of, are there other things that they need? Are there things that I need that now I can ask of them? So I think it's, for me, just evolved into building relationships with people in general, whether they're in recovery or not. I've also learned the importance of, for me personally, learned the importance of our allies in this movement. And my support system now is much bigger than it was a few years ago, even, because my support system now includes a lot of people who aren't in recovery. I mentioned the Phoenix family swarming me after the shooting in Highland Park. Some of those folks were not in recovery. And some of them don't have a lot of experience with people in recovery. But they met me. Somehow we crossed paths in my work at Phoenix. And I mentioned the parole and probation officers. One of my best friends today has been a probation officer for over 25 years. And talk about like the unlikeliest of friends. I mean, I came from the inside of correctional institutions, and he has been an officer within the criminal legal system. And yet he has become such an integral part of my support system, despite not being a person in recovery. So that was a long-winded answer for, I think it's just evolved for me to be something quite a bit bigger.
Yo, so real quick, you know how much we love giving you a behind the scenes look at how we developed this show. We ran into some technical issues when recording Dana. There was some lag between her conversation and our conversation, and it was causing for a disconnect with that human aspect of like being in real time with the conversation. So we actually hit pause. We stopped that recording and then we picked it up about a half an hour later. Now, on the back end, we like to stitch things together. And so we were going to have our editor stitch it together like it never happened. But in true transparent fashion, we want to give you a heads up that we're just going to jump right back into it how we did. So we put this here, and then coming up next is the rest of that conversation with Dana. It's wonderful. So sit tight and enjoy the rest of the convo. So it was hard to interrupt you when we were having like technical difficulties because you have such a ease and comfortability about you that sometimes with guests, we put a lot of effort into creating a space to where that thing is cultivated, where they are able to show up and be open, honest, transparent, and at ease, knowing that this is a space, it's a safe space to share. And you just have that energy about you. So when we were going through the technical difficulties and it was making it harder for us to like really tap into the conversation, we really didn't want to interrupt that because like, yo, she's already in the zone. But I don't think it's a zone for you, Dana. I think, because I've talked to, I forgot who else I talked to, but I've talked to a couple of people where they told me that when Dana's in the room, you get people sharing their stories. And it's like an energy that she has about her that makes people feel comfortable enough to share their stories. And at the beginning of the first part of this conversation, like the table was kind of flipped and you began to ask us questions. And I'm usually I'm in my head, like I'm present in the conversation, but I'm also like, okay, how do I tie this in and how do I keep this conversation flow going? And I found myself like sitting, waiting for the next question from you. Like, like ooh, I like this. So is that something that has always been inherent in the way that you show up? Or is that something that over time has been cultivated? And what has been some of the catalysts for that for you?
I think I'm just curious about people. And I think to speak a little bit to like the comfortability that you mentioned, I think sometimes you might need to intentionally cultivate that with people, but I've been around Phoenix long enough to just have that ingrained in me that I feel safe everywhere I go with our Phoenix family. So I think that has been ingrained in me just from being around Phoenix folks for so long. But I think the curiosity that I have about people is something that I've had for as long as I can remember. I love meeting people on a subway or a bus and talking to people. I strike up conversations with people all the time. It's just so fascinating to me to hear about others and to hear their stories. And I think it's a large part of where I've landed in my career. I currently work as part of our development or fundraising team. And the reason I do that is because of the stories. When I first joined the Phoenix team, I thought it was all about us. It was all about our stories, the members, the volunteers, the staff. And it is. It is still about us. But when I started to connect with people who give, whether it's their time or they're giving financially to support Phoenix, and I started to hear why, and I started to ask them questions about why, I was just blown away by the stories that I heard. People give their time and their talent and their treasure for a reason. And when I started asking questions about that reason and people opened up, I was just so moved. So my career has gone in a trajectory that I didn't anticipate, but so grateful for it because it just puts me in a position every day where I get to ask people why they give.
Yeah. What kind of answers do you get to that question, if you don't mind sharing some that you're at liberty to share?
Oftentimes it's the stories of their personal struggles with substance use, their family's struggles with substance use. And sometimes it's just the story of someone, like I mentioned earlier, how do we come together as a community holistically? How do we smile at people on the street and shovel people's driveways and give up our seat on public transportation when someone else might need it? Sometimes people have a deep personal or family connection to Phoenix. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's just this motivation of, I know that my community needs this and I'm in a position to support it. And that's what I'm going to do. So, it's really a range of stories, but I'm always inspired by the fact that people feel compelled to make this a movement, to make this thing that we've dreamed of, that Scott and Jackie dreamed of years ago. To make that happen, we need people supporting it. So it's been a pretty phenomenal road to see that happen.
Incredible. And they support it in so many ways. I think it's so cool to hear about people being generous with, financial donations, and then people being generous with their time. I think there's just such a incredible generosity to sharing your story, to having a conversation with like what your story was like, or with a loved one, whatever version, and inspiring people to feel, like Bryce was saying, safe enough to tell their story is a huge deal. And I think one of the ways that I was thinking of in recovery that's really just been about embodiment to me is before recovery. Like when I was fully in, addiction, I didn't trust anything that was happening inside of me. Like I was not a person that was trustworthy. And I knew that better than anybody because I knew what was going on the inside, no matter what was happening on the outside. And then once I did get sober, there still was, and continues to be sometimes, a big part of me that was like, let me look out for reassurance or for the answers or for what my story is, like my value, things like that. And more, I've seen this happen to me, and I've seen it happen to people around me, particularly in the Phoenix community, because I think we've got this safe bubble of space that we're able to create wherever we go, that suddenly you can start to look for those answers and that like worth within, and you start to trust the story that is being told by you. Like when somebody says, what is the story you're telling yourself? You actually have access to that, and you don't have to look around and be like, well, I don't know. What do you think? Like, what do you think about me? Like, what's my story? What is my worth? And God, that's just I'm so grateful for that. You can still, you look out. What did I say earlier, Bryce? Gosh, this is not my words, but something about like looking for inspiration outside, but then like looking for answers within is something that's just been really powerful. And I think that's something that you embody and definitely bring out in other people. Cause I feel myself sharing more than I usually do on this podcast because it's easy. It feels like the thing to do when you're here. So thank you. So thank you for being here and helping us share too.
It's been interesting for me living in a new community because I've been in that bubble for so long where you just openly share things. And now I moved to a new neighborhood and a new house. And I had a moment of like asking my partner, like, at what point do I tell the neighbors? Like, what if they give me like their garage door code and they ask me to feed their cat when they're out of town? Should I tell them now? Like, hi, I'm Dana. And, and my husband said, I don't think that you should walk up to the neighbors and introduce yourself with your criminal history. I don't think that you should say, hi, I'm Dana, formerly R866237. That might not go over well, but it really is fascinating because it makes me think about the bubble that we do have. For me, that started with just talking to some of my neighbors about being in recovery. As it comes up, I try not to be awkward about it, but I think it just, in that stigma reduction piece, when we know I don't need to dump my life story and prison stories on people that I just met, but at the same time, like sometimes just talking about something as simple as being in recovery opens doors for them to share their family's journey. And maybe they haven't shared that before.
Having different spaces to be able to share certain parts of our life doesn't mean that is different than before, right? Where it was like we used to compartmentalize, and I'm gonna withhold this, but it's like now, I think discernment is more empowering than compartmentalization, right? So it's like, I discern whether to share this or whether this is a space to share this, and whether this will be an addition to the love, care, and compassion in this space if I share these things. And so, with our show being a space where the more we share, the more of a potential there is for someone who may be listening to relate. Would you like to dig more into like the prison story and how, because it always interests me just in general, like when I meet people now, because there's people like this year will be 10 years, but a long way from that. That's in July for me. But it's like there's people who know me who has never knew me when I was in active addiction, and it still kind of trips me out that that's the case because I've been with me the whole time. And it's like to remember some of the spaces that I came from and some of the things that I did and some of the things that I experienced, like the way that stories are told in culture, it's like, oh, that person never gets to where it is that I've been able to go. That person never sees the things that I've been able to do. That person never does things in integrity and in honesty and, on this side of the fence. Like it's either this or that, right? And so I often find that in recovery, we have these unique circumstances, but like, no, it's and both. And I've experienced this and I'm able to experience this. So when you're talking about like the work that you do, there's somebody that may be staying on the street or there's somebody that may be in prison listening to this right now. That's like, wait, you do what? You work in development? Like, how did you get there from there? So if you would like, share a little bit about your particular story and how you got to where you are.
When you talk about like people who maybe didn't know you 10 years ago and they only know you today, it makes me think about when I drop my daughter off at like she's in ballet and hip hop dance classes and I drop my daughter off and I'm just like another mom dropping their kid off. And I have these moments of like, ooh, if they only knew, and then there's these moments of just incredible gratitude of where I came from versus where I'm at today. And like I said earlier, I will forever be grateful for that. But when I think about what you're saying with, how do we get from here to there? For me, I won't dismiss the fact that I've had a lot of privilege along the way. I think that that is a factor, and I acknowledge that every day. I also think transferable skills, my friend. So, whatever we did in that formal life sometimes leads to, sets us up for success and whatever that looks like through these transferable skills that we have. And for me, that was, I won't go into to some of the transferable skills that I have from those days, but it was just connecting with people. And I didn't have that safe and supportive community back then. But when you pair like some of my old behaviors with a safe and supportive community that is setting me up for success, the possibilities are just limitless. I know people, I have friends who came from, a lifestyle of active addiction, and today they're successful accountants. Turns out they're good with money.
Who knew?
So, and some of my friends will say how, I have 15 years sober and I'm a chief financial officer and I came from this history with addiction. And I think we have so much potential that when we're surrounded by the right people and we can unleash that, it really, just sets us up for something that I think isn't fathomable to us all the time when we're new in recovery. So that's not to say that it always comes easily or it comes without the hiccups in the road, but I do think there's so much that we can unleash.
Yeah. We're the deep thinkers. We're the deep feelers. I mean, often that's the thing that we're trying to mute when we are active is how deep that all those things are, so that when you get to a space where you are when you have the support and the safety to unmute, to hit unmute and suddenly like be heard and allow yourself to feel all those things and think all those things. Yeah, that's like a superpower, the thing that you were afraid of, the thing that was just so too much. It's amazing. It's magic, some might say.
Yeah, I think, the seeds to the solution are in every problem. And I think that, like you said, the transferable skills, what we once may have looked at as, in full circle back to story. I mean, and I know, Dana, you've probably shared your story trillions of times, and may have come across the phenomena of telling your story. And each time you tell it, it gives you a little bit more context on where you've come from, as well as to what you do with that story. Because even when you talk about like having privilege, there was a time that me myself, like I would hear that from somebody and I would use that to, say, well, I haven't had the privilege and, my life has looked like this and this and this. But like I have continuously reframed my experience in such a way that has allowed for me to say, no, actually having to get it from there and take it to here has allowed for me to cultivate so much wisdom that I wouldn't have been able to without that experience. And the more we tell our story over and over to ourselves and discover those little seeds that it's like, oh, you know, uh, I have, I experience ADD symptoms and, it's debilitating and it keeps me from being productive, or taking that and it's like, oh, like I'm aware of these symptoms and these are ways that I can show up that other people can't. And I noticed that other people can't show up in these ways. So maybe I could lean into some of the benefit of having this experience like I do. Um, it takes us back to the story in the beginning where it's like, okay, I'm riding a bike and this is a circumstance that really I have no control over, but I'm super grateful to just be riding my bike right now. And how that there was two stories within that that the same person could tell. It's like, what story helps us to be able to show up in contribution to compassion and understanding for ourselves and for others? And within that lies that seed that we can sprout from and create great things.
Yeah, I think when you ask about like my past and some of the things that I've been through, it is that, I'm not going to say that prison was a great place, but it was certainly an experience that I went through that has brought me to where I am today. And when, like we talked about earlier, that perspective, when I think about my perspective on that experience, it wasn't rosy, it wasn't perfect, it was prison by all means, but at the same time I met some of the most inspirational people. I had my first experience with community building, in the unlikeliest of places. I was surrounded by women who almost raised me in a sense. And, maybe they told me some of the same things that my mom said for years, but when I was 14 years old, I wasn't ready to listen, and now I was. So these were women in a very hopeless feeling place who taught me to have hope, and they taught me empathy, and they taught me the sort of grace and way that they carried themselves in a place that felt so graceless and so hopeless. And I carried that with me. And, in addition to the, the less tangible things that they taught me, there were also some tangible things, some basic skills of daily living and making my bed in the morning and, taking care of myself and taking pride in who I am and what I have to offer. And those are things that I didn't have before being surrounded by those women. So I think, although I said the Phoenix community was something that I didn't fully understand and was something that I just joined to participate in athletic activities, I think those women that I met in prison set me up for this sort of openness to the idea of community.
And openness to people, like just to all sorts of different people. I mean, when you're dropping your kids off or your daughter off at dance, all the other moms are probably thinking maybe for different reasons, and some stories are probably more surprising than others, but also man, if they only knew what was going on behind the scenes. If if somebody looks put together, that is a very often I've heard with mothers, especially, often that is just like a carefully curated thing because there's so much hard stuff that you are just trudging through, and you're able to see each one of those people and know that there is more than what meets the eye, and to see that with the compassion of someone who also is more than meets the eye. And I think that's the key to building those communities, to see each other.
That's a super dope feeling though, to like be there for your kids and know, like, and even beyond, like, if they only knew, like I know, there was times I was in a bed in withdrawal, and my kids would come in like, daddy, and I'm like, nah, and so now to be at every game, to be, at the field trips, you can't name a field trip I haven't been at, and if dad's not at the field trip, it's like, yo, what's going on with dad? Like, why he ain't coming to this field trip? Like that's the normal now. That's a beautiful thing.
It really is, and it's something that just being able to show up like that. I talk about success and the potential that we have and what we can do with our lives, but it's the simple things. It really is. And part of the gratitude that I have today is that I can take my daughter to go get cookies, and then we watch a family movie and it's raining outside, and that's it. And that's my birthday was this week, and that's what I wanted to do for my birthday. Let's watch a family movie. It's raining outside, and we're going to eat cookies.
Hey.
And that's very different from the life that I had even in my early recovery. But that's where the journey has brought me, is that I'm just so grateful for those moments.
That sounds like a great birthday, and happy birthday.
Yeah, I was just going to say that sounds like the perfect birthday. I don't know what anybody else would think, but that's
Can we do
perfect.
that? There's got to be a half birthday coming up, right? I think that might be. I might just do that this Friday.
But yeah, so this has been a heartwarming, heartfelt episode, and I think even though we had some technical difficulties, we were able to show up like recovery allows us to. I think it's been an example of what it means to show up regardless of what you're presented with. And I know we've been looking forward to having you on the show for a very long time. And I know a lot of people are going to pull a lot of good stuff out of this episode. Before we wrap, I want to toss it over to Liz for a question.
What could it be?
I don't know.
I feel like Dana's listened, so she's going to know. One of these days, we're going to have some cool little jingle here, although I will always prefer, I think, your flood of adjectives. So Dana, if you could pull back the curtain of time and send a message to a previous version of yourself, what might that be?
Just hold on. And I know that might be a common one, but I really think about those moments where it felt like I was never going to make it out. There were moments when I remember living on the street, living through homelessness, struggling with my addiction. And there were moments where I just didn't see a way out. And now that I have an opportunity not only to see what life is like for myself, but for so many people that I've had the opportunity to meet in this recovery journey, I watched so many of us make it out and create a life for ourselves that is beyond anything that we ever imagined. So although I know it might be a popular answer, I think it's just hold on in those moments. And maybe in addition to just holding on, maybe reach out to that person that Bryce was talking about. Maybe it's get out of your comfort zone. And at the time when I was struggling, we didn't have a Phoenix app. If that had been there, I think that's something that I might say to my former self, is reach out to somebody on the app, because we got you and we're going to help you get to where we know you can go.
Love that. It's not, I don't think we've heard it worded that way. I think that's beautiful and just as unique as you are. And I think it's not only a beautiful message for anybody, but also I kind of picture whenever we ask this question, I always picture that, previous version of you hearing that, and I almost feel like she is holding on. She did hold on. Like, here you are. Like, she did hold on. And for folks that are listening, like just hold on. And also you are, like, also you're doing it. Like, you did it again today. Like, you just hold on, and you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
You showed up. Well, thank you, both of you. Thanks for hanging out with technology being magical and not so magical at times. Glad we were able to still have this conversation, because it really was a special one. And thank you to everybody who is out there listening. It's just such an honor to be able to be here speaking on these microphones, and do not take that lightly at all. Please do subscribe so that we can continue these conversations week after week. If you haven't already and you wouldn't mind reviewing or rating our show, that helps people find it. But honestly, I feel like we're one of those shows that the best way to get it out there is to share it. Share stories, like send this to somebody. I know anytime anybody thinks of me and sends me a podcast or a song or anything, it's just like, this made me think of you. I thought that there were some beautiful words here that might make your day, because it made my day. It always really does. You never know who's going to need it. So maybe just share it, and maybe they can chat with us too. And how could they do that, right?
Well, first of all, I mean, for what you said, I think there's a couple of people that send me things. When they send me things, like, I'm definitely going to listen to that, right?
Yeah.
So that you listening, you are that somebody for somebody, you know? So when you send it off, not only is it showing that you care for somebody, but it also is like, that's how we build community. Like, oh, like, this came from this person? Oh, yeah, I got to get this a listen. But if you want to keep up with us and tap in with us and chat with us, you can hop on over to the Rise, Recover, Live podcast group in the app, the Phoenix app. So if you don't have the Phoenix app, go download the Phoenix app. But then when you download the Phoenix app, come to the group. We got different groups in there: Plants of the Phoenix, Pets of the Phoenix, and the podcast group. Come in there. You all are already very active in there, giving us recommendations for topics, and helping us figure out how the heck we gonna introduce ourselves every beginning of the episode. And as you can see, it's still a work in progress. But we appreciate you all being vocal. That's giving us feedback and letting us know that you're really enjoying the content, as well as engaging each other, because I think the most important thing is that you all connect with each other. So yes, hop on the Phoenix app. Then when you get on the Phoenix app, hop in the Rise, Recover, Live podcast group, connect with each other, and holler at us.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will see you in the podcast group, and we will see you next time.
See ya.
So now you're excited. Bryce, Liz, how do I get involved with the Phoenix? Well, my friend, it is super simple. We actually have an app. Head over to the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, or look in the show notes of this podcast, wherever you're listening to or watching this podcast, and go download the Phoenix app.
The Phoenix app makes it so easy to find classes that are near you, or to access our virtual class schedule, where you can hop on from the comfort of your home. You can also join our groups and have a conversation with someone from the Phoenix community from anywhere in the world. Please make sure that you join the podcast group, where you can connect with Bryce and I and other listeners. Everything that you need is in the show notes. You can also head to our website at www.thephoenix.org. And maybe while you're there, you click the volunteer tab and get even more involved.